Thoughtful Connections, a memory care podcast, aims to provide general information and insights about dementia and related topics. The content shared is not intended to be medical advice or a substitute for professional medical or clinical guidance. The purpose or goal of this podcast series is to help inform and educate family members considering memory care for a loved one. With us, as always, is Elizabeth Thompson, Arrow Senior Living Regional Director of Memory Care.
Hello, Elizabeth. It is always a pleasure to be with you.
Well, it's great to be with you, Charlie.
Oh, you're so sweet. Well, you know what, today we will provide an understanding of triggers and discuss effective de-escalation strategies in support of individuals living with dementia.
Okay.
That's a mouthful, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I can't believe you were able to get all that out.
I had to practice.
Well, good. I'm glad you did.
Well, okay. So, per usual, let's start with the basics. So you tell us, what do we mean when we say triggers in dementia care?
Triggers in dementia care are just like triggers in being a human. So what is something that triggers you?
Well, I hate to say it, but just seeing you triggers me.
Yeah. Well, feelings mutual.
But triggers. I mean, well, if I smell certain smells, it might trigger me to think that I might be hungry.
Yep.
Yeah. If I smell a good bourbon, it might trigger me to have a drink.
Okay.
All right. You need more examples?
No, I mean, I think that's great. A trigger can be, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing. It could also be a positive thing. Like you said, you know, you smell a certain kind of food and you're hungry. You know, I smell chips and salsa and I'm like, ooh, yeah, enchiladas. But it can be a sound or a word, a situation, and even a smell that with dementia, it particularly would cause, we're looking at things that would be on the negative side that would cause them distress or anxiety or to feel unsafe or confused or even overwhelmed. You know, their brain processes the world differently than our brain does. So we're able to know truths, you know, as far as, well, I smell that, but that doesn't mean that that particular person who wears that perfume is here. It reminded me. But for someone with dementia, it might seem very real to them. So you can even think about like a woman who, and actually we had this in one of our communities, a woman who had suffered multiple miscarriages. We had our nursery station right outside of her apartment, and we had to move that because that was a trigger for her. She never had any children of her own, but she had a lot of trauma due to all the miscarriages that she had. And so seeing the nursery with the babies was just not good, especially walking out of her apartment every day. So, you know, it can be something like that. It can even be like a certain perfume or men's cologne that triggers a memory. You know, sometimes you just smell something and it takes you back to a place. So
I know.
Sometimes we don't even know.
The smell of lilacs, for example.
Oh, yeah?
That reminds me of walking down the sidewalk into my grandfather's house because there was a huge lilac bush there. So every time I smell lilac, I immediately think of walking into my grandfather's house.
And see, that's very pleasant. When I smell mothballs, I think of my grandparents' house because they were always afraid of the, you know, moths getting on their coats. And so the closets were always filled with. Bleh.
Yeah, that's not a very pleasant smell. Well, from now on, just think of lilacs. And maybe that'll help you.
That will.
So it's not necessarily, when we talk about triggers, it's not necessarily about what's happening. It's about how it's being experienced by the individual.
Exactly. And for someone who's living with dementia, they may not be able to express their feelings. So, you know, a loud TV, or we're trying to rush them through the bathing process. A change even in their routine. We've talked multiple times about how people living with dementia aren't babies. But when you look at the brain scan of a newborn baby and the brain scan of someone with, advanced stage dementia, they're very similar. And when routines are thrown off for a baby or someone with advanced dementia, it can wreak havoc on their day, and can feel even threatening to them. So when this happens, and if they aren't able to communicate feelings like they used to, that could come out as agitation or aggression even.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So are there particular, or let me restate, are there some more common or most common triggers that you've seen over your years?
There's quite a few. I would say probably one of the biggest is overstimulation. And that it always happens innocently enough, but when you have maybe in one part of the neighborhood you've got music, right? Mm-hmm. And you've got the music therapy team there, and they're doing a sing-along. But then it just so happens that several family members come to visit and are trying to get the attention of their loved one, and they're kind of hollering or being louder. Their voices are raised. And that, along with the music and just the additional people, can be overstimulating. I don't have dementia right now, but I know that when my husband's listening to the TV and he's also watching reels on his phone, I'm like, pick one. Like I can't handle hearing both. It's overstimulating for me. So, that is one that is very common. Unmet needs. Are you about to say something to make fun of me?
I was just picturing myself at home with the TV on watching reels. That's all. That's all I've got to say about that.
Does June ever holler at you and say, pick
she
one?
Usually just either sends me downstairs or she'll go downstairs. So maybe you just need to find a different room.
Well, that's true. I just probably need to shut the door so I can't hear him.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're good.
I was just smiling out loud. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, you're good. You're good. So common triggers, yes, overstimulation, unmet needs. Do they need to go to the bathroom? Are they hungry? Are they thirsty? Do they have pain? Those are, triggers as well. Feeling rushed. I think when we approach too fast, that can be a trigger because it's scary to the person who's living with dementia. And then past trauma. A lot of our residents living with us, or even people that we're caring for as family members, we don't always know what past trauma they experienced. I used to tell my staff, my memory care support partners, let's assume everyone we're caring for has had some sort of past sexual trauma. Because when we think that way, our approach is slower. We are explaining what we're going to do next. We're going above and beyond at protecting dignity. A lot of our family members aren't aware of certain trauma. We talk about it more now than we used to 30, 40, 50 years ago. And so it may not even be something that families are aware of, but it could be a trigger. That's why our engagement plans are so important of once we get to know that person, if we realize that, hey, that person has to have a female or has to have a male providing, care for them, we need to know those things. We want to try and prevent the triggers if we can.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I would think also that maybe even if someone's just tired or if they were fatigued, that could be a trigger as well.
Yes, absolutely. I think we have to think about what triggers us, what makes me frustrated. I get hangry. My husband will tell you, I get hangry. And so, if it's 6 o'clock and I haven't eaten and he's not home, I'm usually texting him saying, I'm eating without you.
Well,
Because I'm hungry. I'm hangry.
Well, as I've gotten older, I have discovered that about mid-afternoon, I start getting fatigued. I start getting tired, and I'm no longer my creative self. I'm no longer, as productive. So I, a couple of years ago, I started my work day instead of from 8 to 5. I started from 7 to 4. So that way I could start earlier, when I'm fresh and more creative, and then end earlier in the day, and before I start becoming too tired and where I'm not as productive, and so that has worked out well for me.
Yeah, that's great.
It just
makes a lot of sense.
You just have to figure out, what works, and again, that's just an example of fatigue coming into play. So all this makes sense, but their world is already confusing, and so all these things just add to their stress when we're talking about these triggers.
Yes, and when we understand those triggers, we can start preventing that escalation before it ever happens.
Okay, so let's talk about the next portion. When we talk about de-escalating, let's talk about that portion of today's topic. So what can caregivers do in the moment to de-escalate the situation?
Stay calm, and we'll talk a little bit more about how our mood.
No, that's easy for you to say. You need to back up and start over.
I know, I do. I need to start over.
Well, take a breath and do it.
You're a trigger for me.
I am your trigger right now.
Okay.
So de-escalate me.
When we understand the triggers, we can start to prevent that escalation before it ever happens. And I also want to talk about how our mood, our behavior, it is contagious. And so staying calm is a huge piece of it. If you're calm, you're going to transmit calm. If you're happy and, you're going to transmit positive feelings. And so our body language matters, our tone matters, the smile on our face matters. But also it goes back to that validation therapy that we talked about in a previous podcast. Validate how they're feeling. I can see you're really upset, or I can see you're scared. Tell me more about that. Why are you scared, or why are you angry? That must be really upsetting. Redirect them gently, offering a different activity or a snack or a drink, putting something in their hands. If they're not escalated, if they're too escalated, don't put something in their hands because they might throw it at you. But give them space if needed, but also using familiar comforts to them. So if you know that they like a particular blanket or a certain type of music, adding those things too can help.
So it sounds like it's not about controlling the situation. You're actually connecting with the individual.
Absolutely. I had a gentleman who had Lewy body and Parkinson's dementia, and he would get really, really anxious and angry. And more than anything, it was him not understanding his surroundings because he knew it wasn't familiar. And I could just walk by him or sit in a chair opposite of him holding one of our weighted babies. And I wouldn't even have to say anything to him. I could just ooh and coo with the baby and pat the baby, and he would immediately start to calm down and say, "Can I hold your baby?" And it took him from up here down to here. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's not, I was giving him space because he was angry. And at that point, there's a part of you that's kind of scared, is he going to hurt me? And so I'm giving him his space, but I'm comforting a baby mm-hmm. that is just a trigger for him of love and feelings of comfort and joy. And then he steps into that.
Yeah, but you also were using redirection
Right.
at the same time.
Right.
I mean, you redirected his attention
Yep.
simply by sitting down with that baby. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there are definitely lots of things to use, but what can caregivers do to prevent these moments in the first place? What do you suggest there?
Knowing the person. Keeping those routines consistent, making sure that we're writing down and tracking what triggers them. One thing that we do in the communities that actually is a very wise idea for people to do at home is if you have someone that you're caring for that sometimes is an emotional roller coaster, making sure that we are creating like a behavior or an expression log to be able to log when these things are happening. It's very interesting to go back and look for us as caregivers in communities. Wow, this is happening with this particular resident every day around the 3:00 time. So yes, it's part of sundowning, but what else is going on there? Is it that their previous job was that the time to leave? Or let's dig a little deeper here. And by having a log or a tracker that you can write these things down, it helps you to see that bigger picture. Maybe it's someone who is getting a medication every day at 4 to help with some of their sundowning, but these escalations are happening more at 3. Well, maybe we need to look at changing the time of that medication. Or maybe this person is getting hungry before dinner. Maybe we need to try and add a snack at this time. But when you are writing down those behaviors and kind of tracking them, you can really learn a lot.
Again, and to remind folks, not just in communities, but at home
At
as
home,
well.
yeah.
And so really give it some thought, consideration. What happened just before?
Yep.
Just before we had this episode or incident, what could my person have been thinking, or what might have affected my individual right there?
Yeah. What happened before? What happened after? What did you do to try and redirect or validate? Did it work? Did it not work? What did they eat that day? Was it something that's irritating their stomach? Because pain, again, can trigger expressions. And so
there are a lot of variables.
There's a lot of variables.
And so that's why it's so important to keep track of every possibility that it might have been.
Because there's so many things. I mean, did they need to go to the bathroom? Were they hot? Were they cold? There's just so many things it could be. But when you're starting to write those things down on paper and be able to look at them from a broader lens, you're really able to kind of pinpoint, okay, this could be this, and narrow down what some of those possible meanings are.
Well, and like many things, it's a learning process.
Yeah.
And it's not just for the caregiver, but for the individual with dementia as well. It's a whole process that has to be learned and put together, right?
That's right. Knowledge is power.
You got that right. Knowledge is power. So, Elizabeth, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with us today about triggers and about de-escalation?
I do. There is something called emotional contagion, and we really impress upon our caregivers about this. But for those caregivers who are at home, I think it's very important for them to realize what emotional contagion is. We possess millions of mirror neurons that cause us to mimic other people. And that's where you go into a restaurant and one baby starts crying and then all the babies start crying. We've seen this with laughter therapy. So there's something called laughter therapy, and I used to do it as an activity director, where I would have my residents that had dementia, and we would all be in a circle, and I would just start laughing for no reason. And it really sounded pretty fake, but then everybody started jumping in and laughing too. Our emotions are contagious. So when you are in a situation that is escalated with someone living with dementia, even if you have to turn around and take a deep breath and count to 10 to turn around, back around towards them and smile, do it. Because it will be amazing the difference that you see when you're not up here. You can bring them down here if you're down here. Mm-hmm. Much easier.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And of course, this kind of ties into other things we've talked about with caregiver burnout and stress and needing support and on and on and on and on and on. So we understand what caregivers go through, and they are the saints in all this. Especially the ones at home taking care of individuals 24/7. A lot of them are and don't take care of themselves, don't have the self-care, and so those truly are the ones that probably really need the support and really need to take that moment to bring themselves down, because it can be so easy to.
Oh gosh, yeah, very understandable to get frustrated.
No, absolutely.
I think as a caregiver, we need to, especially a caregiver at home versus a caregiver in a community. A caregiver in a community, they have stressful situations also, and we know that they also have things going on outside of work that can be stressful, but they're on a shift. Uh-huh. The person at home caregiving, it's round the clock. And maybe they get an hour or two here or there to get a break or run to the store. But 24/7 caregiving is exhausting.
Mm-hmm. That's a tough job.
It's very tough.
A tough job. So that's why it's important to have these tools to understand all these different ways to help them through the day and through the night.
Yes.
And to educate themselves to help them along the way.
Need a whole a whole toolbox of tools. I'm getting tongue-tied again. See, you're my trigger.
Oh, I'm so sorry I'm your trigger, but it's sure good to be here with you to be your trigger. Elizabeth, I do want to thank you for sharing some of your insightful information today.
Thank you for having me.
On triggers and de-escalation. And thank you all for sharing your time with us.
At Arrow Senior Living, we believe in the power of a chuckle, maintaining a childlike sense of wonder, and defending the dignity of others. Until next time, this is Charlie Johnson with Arrow's Thoughtful Connections, a memory care podcast, wishing you fond memories filled with moments of joy. And remember, if you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia.
You can find Thoughtful Connections, a memory care podcast, anywhere you listen to podcasts.